let's talk about some of Colombia's most popular music genres. Hi all, I'm Isrado and you're watching my travel channel where I talk all things Colombia. So as you may or may not know, one of my biggest passions in life and outside of Colombia is music. I love writing music, I've been playing piano for most of my life, and I also have another YouTube channel where I've been posting piano tutorials, covers and original songs for almost 10 years now. I even produced the intro music for this channel, which I might eventually turn into a full track. Anyway, as you might imagine therefore, I'm pretty excited for today's video, which combines both my passion for music along with my passion for Colombia. Specifically, I want to talk about 5 popular genres of music you'll find in Colombia. Although not all of these genres were originally invented in Colombia, they've all at least been heavily employed by Colombian composers and musicians and are widely celebrated throughout the country, therefore carrying a lot of cultural significance. Now I'm going to try and play an example track in the background for each of these styles, but if the video happens to get copyright claimed and blocked for that, I'll just re-upload it with regular royalty-free music. Either way, I'll put links to examples in the description so you can check those out. Finally, I just want to make a disclaimer before I start that I'm going to be describing these genres in their most typical form, but you'll absolutely find songs with plenty of exceptions to everything I say, so these shouldn't be seen as rigid definitions, but more as a good starting point to help you get a basic understanding for each genre. Anyway, let's get right into it. So, to start with, we have probably the most popular genre of music in Colombia, and that is cumbia. This is typically a very bright and celebratory genre centered around a strong syncopated rhythm, making it highly danceable. As with a lot of Colombia's most iconic music, this style comes from the Caribbean region. Stylistically, there does seem to be influence taken from several ethnic groups. For instance, many of the percussive instruments often found in the genre, such as the guache shakers, were originally brought over by African slaves several centuries ago. But then some of the other percussive instrumentation, along with the underlying rhythm, is probably more reminiscent of the music from indigenous groups in the area. Beyond the percussion and rhythm though, the melodic elements are noticeably a lot more European, with instruments such as the gaita flute, and especially the accordion being quite common for the genre. Admittedly, it's hard to pin down very precisely what cumbia sounds like, because it does seem to encapsulate quite a wide range of music. Heck, since its inception in Colombia, it even spread to other Latin American countries who put their own spins on it, and that's not even mentioning the amount of fusion genres that have grown out of it in Colombia alone. If we're just focusing on classic Colombian cumbia though, here are some defining elements to look out for. First of all, the instruments. The melodic instrumentation here will often include accordions and flutes, as said before, and sometimes brass. And on the percussive side of things, there tends to be quite a large assortment of instruments, such as maracas, the tambora drum, the guache shakers I also mentioned earlier, and a guacharaca, which is a kind of ribbed stick, which when scraped is meant to sound like a bird call. In terms of vocals, you'll often find they consist of a sort of call and response pattern here, where the lead singer will sing half a phrase, and then a group of backup singers will respond to complete it. Now rhythmically, cumbia music uses the common type signature, basically 4 beats per bar, and while certainly not universal, it's also common for there to be a syncopated rhythm with a percussive element in between each beat, like 1, 2, 3, 4. It's also common to hear the second and fourth beats emphasized, like 1, 2, 3, 4. As for tempo, it can honestly range all over the shop, but a lot of it tends to be around 95 to 120 beats per minute, so moderate to moderately fast, I'd say. Now, I would be remiss not to mention the dance aspect of cumbia as well. As you might imagine, this is a partner dance between men and women, which in this case is meant as a symbol of traditional courtship. Despite this, it's actually one of the least physically intimate partner dances, as touching typically doesn't go much beyond lightly holding hands. Instead, the dancers will likely shuffle and circle around each other, once again as a metaphor for courtship. The man's movements symbolize the role of the suitor attempting to win the woman's affection, while the woman's movements are somewhat more modest, but symbolize a playful resistance to the man's advances. Costumes are also very important for this genre. Men will typically wear a white shirt and pants, along with a red scarf and a vuelteado hat, while women dress in a special cumbia dress known as a pollera. It's also traditional for the woman to be holding either a candle or a handkerchief in her right hand, helping to emphasize her movements. Anyway, there's honestly so much more to say about cumbia, but I got a lot of other genres to cover in this video, so I'm gonna leave it here for this one. If you do want to learn more about it though, there's a wealth of material online, so a simple Google search should suffice. As for a good example track, I'd recommend listening to the classic Amor Sin Fronteras, which I'll link in the description. Up next though, let's talk about the genre of Bambuco. This one originated in the Andean region of Colombia and contains influences from both waltz music from Europe, along with music from indigenous groups in the area, particularly the Quechua people. One thing that makes it stand out is its time signature, which is traditionally in 6/8, although this is often broken down into 3/4, which is what gives it the feel of a waltz. If you're not a muso, basically what this means is that it's counted as either 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 if it's 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 if it's 6, 8. The tempo, meanwhile, whilst not usually crazy fast, is usually in the moderate to moderately fast range. In terms of style and mood, I find that Bambuco often carries more of a pensive tone and isn't quite as bright and energetic as a lot of other music in Colombia like Cumbia. It is still, however, a very expressive and emotionally evocative genre, with lyrics that are quite often poetic and reflective, with the singer really bearing their soul through honest vulnerability. In terms of instrumentation, Bambuco tends to lean very heavily into a variety of plucked string instruments, including the tiple, which often provides the rhythmic foundation to the song. You also find both standard guitars along with the requinto, which is basically a smaller and higher pitched guitar, and then finally there may be either a bandola, which is a bit like a mandolin, or a mandolin itself. Now, Bambuco is also a style of partner dance in Colombia, and there are definitely some similarities here to Cumbia. Both are symbols of courtship, where the man tries to impress the woman with his elaborate dance steps, while the woman responds through more graceful movement. Unlike Cumbia though, Bambuco is somewhat more physically intimate, with a little bit more hand-holding and without all the dancing around each other in a circle. The moves are also a bit more precise and intricate compared to the relatively relaxed Cumbia, and in terms of costumes, these are of course traditional clothes from the Andean regions. Finally, for a good Bambuco example track, I recommend listening to El Bunde Tolimense. Once again, link in the description for that. Moving on though, let's circle back to the Caribbean regions for a bit to talk about the genre of Vallenato, oftentimes one of the most energetic styles in the country, depending on the song. The term Vallenato literally means born in the valley, which is a reference to the valley city where this style originated, Valledupar, in northeastern Colombia. The genre was originally created incidentally by traveling farmers back in the early 1900s. As they traveled, they'd share recent news between each town they'd visit, only they communicated this news through song to make things a little more entertaining. Initially, they'd perform with guacharacas and gaita flutes, the same instruments I described in Cumbia, but as the style evolved, more instruments were added, including the now genre-defining accordion. The presence of this instrument is honestly a good way to tell if a song is vallenato or not. If you're in Colombia and you hear a tune that's heavy on the accordion, there's a high chance it's vallenato, as this is one of the most iconic characteristics. Also worth noting that you don't even need to be in the coastal regions to hear it, as, similar to Cumbia, this music gets played everywhere. Not gonna lie, I'm not a huge fan of this genre, or at least not the super energetic variants of it. There's just so much accordion in it that I find it becomes tiresome pretty quickly, and I think when you lean so heavily on one distinctive instrument like this that's being interminably noodled, it feels like after you've heard one song, you've heard them all. It also doesn't help that you're hearing it all the time in Colombia, which can make you get sick of it real fast. After the millionth time you've listened to it, it all starts to blend into each other, and so you'll just be sitting in a restaurant disassociating like... All subjectivity aside, it should be noted that there are several variants of vallenato, each defined by their unique rhythmic and melodic structures. These include son, paseo, merengue, and puya. In terms of time signatures, the first of these two are typically in 2/4, while the latter two are in 6/8. As for tempo, these can range between each genre variant, but the puya is particularly iconic for how fast it can progressively get, reaching up to 220 beats per minute in some cases, or prestissimo. Beyond these traditional variants, there are also some fusion genres that have cropped up in more recent years. One of the country's most famous singers, Carlos Vives for instance, is known to merge pop and rock with vallenato in order to modernize it a bit. That being said, traditional vallenato is still very much alive in the country today, so this definitely isn't a replacement. Now for a vallenato example track, I put a link in the description for a bright and energetic song called El Santo Cachón. Moving on though, this next genre is probably my favorite on this list, and that is salsa. Now before anyone goes correcting me in the comments, yes, I realize this genre wasn't invented in Colombia. Originally it came from Puerto Rican and Cuban communities in New York during the 1950s and 60s, although the term salsa wasn't attached to this musical style until the 1970s. Stylistically, it grew out of a gradual fusion of various Latin American genres like the Cuban son mantuno, mambo, and cha-cha-cha, along with jazz that was popular in the US at the time. Today though, as you may or may not know, salsa is extremely popular in Colombia, with the city of Cali in particular often considered the world's salsa capital. The genre initially became prominent in the country during the 1970s, and even more so in the 1980s. In terms of style, Colombian salsa, more commonly known as salsa caleña, which just goes to show how iconic the Cali salsa scene is is often known to be a lot quicker than other salsa variants. As for instrumentation, there'll typically be a lot of brass, but also the salsa piano, which often consists of chords being played across several octaves, giving it that distinct salsa sound that's instantly recognizable. The main difference to salsa from elsewhere though, besides the tempo, is that salsa caleña has a little bit of influence from other Colombian genres, particularly cumbia, which may contribute to its more intricate rhythms. Whereas other salsa rhythms will often have a relatively more relaxed groove, salsa in Colombia is very busy, with bass and piano lines in particular being a bit more elaborate. Speaking of arrangement, you may remember me mentioning earlier the call and response pattern that can often be found in the vocals of cumbia music, and yes, this has been injected into Colombian salsa too, only here it's often between the instruments and the voice as opposed to multiple voices. Then finally, going back to the instrumentation again, you will notice that many of the supporting instruments, particularly the percussive instruments like the guacharaca, have also been taken straight out of traditional cumbia, giving it a distinctive Colombian identity. Now in terms of mood, Colombian salsa is very energetic, as you might guess from those rapid tempos, but in my opinion it's also often a little spicy and edgy. I mean, as you probably know, salsa literally means sauce in Spanish, and I think saucy would be a good description of most types of salsa, but particularly salsa caleña. So that's a bit about the music, but I would be remiss not to mention the dance aspect of salsa too, as this is honestly just as, if not more important than Colombia. Just like the music, the salsa dance is known to be pretty fast in Colombia. As far as movement goes, you'll often hear people say that it's all in the hips, which is somewhat true, at least in the sense that you'll be moving your hips a lot more than your upper body, but there's some important footwork involved too. In fact, the footwork in Colombian salsa tends to be a bit more intricate than what you might find in other salsa styles, to match with the more complex rhythms in the music. If you'd like to try it, you can find salsa schools in many of Colombia's major cities, but it should be noted that salsa dancing is by far the most prominent in Cali. In fact, Cali is home to the highest amount of salsa schools of not only any city in Colombia, but also the world, hence its title of the world salsa capital. If you'd prefer to just watch it, Cali is also known to have many huge salsa competitions and festivals you can go and see every year, so keep an eye out for those. Finally, before I move on to the next genre, I'd recommend listening to the song En Barranquilla Me Quedo for an example of a Colombian salsa classic, but also I happen to have written a salsa song of my own, which I'll put a link in the description for also. I realize that it's probably not as authentic, but I did hire a vocalist from Cali to sing on it, so hey, that's got to count for something. Anyway, the last genre I wanted to talk about is another one that didn't actually originate in Colombia, but once again is extremely popular there, and that is reggaeton. As you might imagine, this is a much newer genre than all the others on this list, dating back only to the 1980s. The roots of it can be traced back to the descendants of Jamaican immigrants in Panama around this time, who brought with them their musical traditions, such as reggae and its up-and-coming derivative dancehall, which was set apart for its faster tempos and focused on digitally produced instrumentals known as riddims. Panamanian artists would adopt these genres but put Spanish lyrics on them and write about urban Latin American culture and experiences. This adapted genre would become aptly known as reggae en español, or reggae in Spanish. Before long, the genre would also incorporate elements from hip-hop and other popular urban genres. It would soon spread throughout the Caribbean, and most notably Puerto Rico, who would further modify it and contribute to the genre's explosion in popularity after many years of prominence in their underground scene. It was here that it evolved into what we know today as reggaeton. By the mid-2000s, it became popular all around the world, but especially Latin American countries such as Colombia, where several notable reggaeton artists would emerge, such as J Balvin and Maluma. So that's a bit of history, but what does it actually sound like? Well, these days, probably the easiest way to tell if a track's reggaeton is if it has that iconic dembo beat. This is that drum beat you hear in pretty much all of this music that goes, usually with a kick and a snare. I realize that this beat exists in other genres too, particularly those that reggaeton evolved from, but again, these days, if you happen to hear a tune with this beat, there's a high chance it's reggaeton, given how popular the genre is. Probably the other main defining factor of reggaeton is its lyrical content. Similar to hip-hop, the lyrics used to have a much bigger focus on urban culture within disadvantaged communities. Although now the genre has exploded in popularity, it's given way to a lot of international superstars who don't exactly fit that description. The lyrics in modern reggaeton tracks often tend to focus on, well, mostly objectifying women, if I'm being brutally honest. Look, I'm really not a fan of this genre overall, but I'll save my full opinion for another video, as I don't want this one to get too subjective. But yeah, to me this genre is quite similar to a lot of the most mainstream modern hip-hop you might hear, in the sense that the production is fairly minimal and the vocals are either rap or this highly auto-tuned singing that tends to only oscillate between a few notes. The main differentiating factor is that reggaeton has that aforementioned dembo beat, and the lyrics are often a lot more vulgar. As I said before, reggaeton is extremely popular in Colombia. During my time living there, it was easily one of the genres of music I heard the most, probably in the top 3 along with Cumbia and Vallenato. They even have entire radio stations dedicated to only playing reggaeton, and you hear it everywhere, not just at parties. There's a good chance you've heard a reggaeton song before, but in case not, maybe check out Mi Gente by J Balvin and Willie William. With that though, I'm going to close this one here. Those were 5 popular genres of music in Colombia. Of course, there are many other genres you'll find in the country, so maybe I'll do another video sometime covering 5 more. For now though, I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching all this way, and as always, feel free to like, subscribe, bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao!